Good Shabbos, everyone. The story is told that a rabbi stands before his congregation on Rosh Hashanah and reports to them that there's a massive hole in the roof of the synagogue. But the rabbi continues. He says, now I have good news and I have bad news for you. The good news is we have the money to repair it. The bad news is that money is in your pockets. Yes, as we know, it is expensive to run a synagogue. But you know what's even more expensive than running a synagogue? In this day and age, raising a child. Just recently, the Brookings Institute put out an estimate of how much does it cost for a middle-income American today to raise a child. And they based this estimate on the following. They included housing, food, clothing, healthcare, childcare, and they also accounted for children's milestones and activities, things like diapers and haircuts, sports equipment and dance lessons. But they included public school. This didn't count for day school or private high school, and it didn't count for the most expensive item of all, college, as I'm now discovering with 2 kids in college. How much do you think it was just to get a child through high school in America today? The cost, $300,000 per child. And of course, when you add in college tuition, $300,000 is just a drop in the bucket. It's never been more expensive to raise a child in America today. For centuries, throughout human history, having children brought economic benefit to families. The idea was the more children you had, the more children could help you run the farm, or plow your land, or milk the cows. But now, especially in America, it's actually not a cost benefit to have a child, but it's actually a liability to have a child if you look at it from a cost estimate. And this idea is actually having an effect on how many children Americans are having today. In record numbers, more and more families are deciding not to have children. And not just because of the economic costs. Before recent increases in inflation, many millennials, were already opting out of parenthood. Instead, many are choosing to focus on their careers, retain their independence, and avoid those high costs, and perhaps become cool aunts and uncles instead. There's also another factor, another challenge in raising a child. It's not easy. Of course, our bat mitzvah is perfect and her older brother, but for all of us that have children, we know none of them are perfect. There are challenges. There are discipline issues, behavioral issues. It takes discipline and a lot of hard work. It's no wonder that going back 3,000 years, we have the law in our Torah portion today of the Ben Sorer Umareh, the wayward and defiant son. In this commandment, believe it or not, if a child was declared as a wayward and defiant son, a glutton and a drunkard, the parents would bring him out and the elders of the town would stone that child to death. Now, I'm not advocating this to save money. But since the time of the Torah, for thousands of years, raising children has never been easy. Now add in the enormous financial cost. And it's no wonder that more than ever before in modern day America, parents are asking, what's the point? And there's some very frightening results of recent surveys. One survey found that the largest percentage of millennial and Gen Z moms ever are saying they don't plan to have more children. In 2020, just 2 years ago, 43% of millennial moms said they want to have another child. Today, it's down to 30%. A Pew Research study published just this past November found that a rising share of U.S. adults who don't already have kids don't expect to ever have them. A record 44% of non-parents between the ages of 18 and 49 reported they weren't likely to have children in the future. 44%. As a rabbi, in our community, I see it. I see it often. Young adults, if they get married, are getting married later and later. And then if they decide to have children, which many do not in this day and age, but if they decide to have children, they're likely to have maybe one, maybe two children at the most. I'm seeing less and less families, and of course there are exceptions, but less and less families having more than two children. The days when I was a younger rabbi, just 20 years ago, it was more common for our families to have 3 or 4 children. I don't see that as often as today. It's not a judgment of families, it's just what this day and age is showing. Couples are getting married later, and therefore are less likely to have as many children as they did in the past. And add in all the factors that I've already discussed. So why have a child? With all the challenges, from the economic challenges to the discipline issues, to all the challenges that all of us as parents know what goes into raising a child, what wisdom can our Jewish tradition and history give us to answer this all-important question? To answer the question, I want to look at Jewish history. And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, may his memory be for a blessing, makes the following points. Throughout much of our people's history, the fate of Jewish communities was determined by a single factor: their decision or lack of decision to put children first. In fact, the rabbis going back 2,000 years ruled that any town that lacks children at school is to be excommunicated. Already in the first century, the Jewish community in Israel had established a network of schools in which attendance was mandatory. It was the first such system in the history of humankind. And that pattern continued throughout the difficult Middle Ages. In 12th century France, a Christian scholar noted, quote, "A Jew, however poor, if he has 10 sons, will put them all in school, not for profit, but for the understanding of God's law, not only his sons, but his daughters as well." In 1432, at the height of Christian persecution of Jews in Spain, a plan was implemented to institute a system of taxation to fund Jewish education for all. In 1648, at the end of the 30 Years' War, the first thing Jewish communities in Europe did to reestablish Jewish life was to reorganize the educational system. In their classic study at the shtetl, the small townships of Eastern Europe where many of our parents and grandparents came from, scholars write this about the typical Jewish family. They write, the most important item in the family budget is the tuition fee that must be paid each term to the teacher of the younger boy's school. Parents will bend in the sky to educate their child. The mother who has charge of household accounts will even cut the cost of food, if necessary, in order to pay for their child's schooling. If worst comes to worst, she'll pawn her cherished pearls in order to pay for the school term. The belief was that the child must study, must become a good Jew, and for her, the two were synonymous. In 1849, when Samson Raphael Hirsch became rabbi in Frankfurt, he insisted that the community create a school before building the synagogue. And after the Holocaust, the few surviving yeshiva heads and Hasidic leaders concentrated on encouraging their followers to have more children. It's hard to think of any other religion or civilization in the history of this planet that has predicated its very existence on putting children first. Why has this always been the case for Jews? There have been Jewish communities in the past that were affluent and built magnificent synagogues. Alexandria, Egypt, in the first century of the Common Era is a great example. Yet because that community did not put children first, they contributed little to the Jewish story. They flourished briefly, then disappeared. Property in our tradition is always secondary, children primary. It's a fundamental statement of Jewish priorities. Because civilizations that value the young stay young. Religions and people that invest in the future have a future. The tradition, through the mitzvot, through the values of our people, has always said, It's not what we own that gives us a share in eternity, but those to whom we give birth. And the effort we make sure, and we do, to ensure that our precious children, our grandchildren, carry our faith and way of life into the next generation only ensures that our people will still be here. Often I'm honored to prepare families and help them as they lay someone to rest. And the number one topic that always comes up, no matter how successful someone was, no matter what type of business he or she built, no matter what type of career they had, we primarily speak about how they were as a father or a mother. And no family I've ever met with in my 21 years of the 21 years I've been honored to be a rabbi has ever regretted having a child. No matter how challenging it may have been, it brought so much meaning to their life. My message to our young parents who are considering whether or not they can afford to have a child in this day and age, whether it's worth all the effort, would be, yes, it is. That I promise them, and I promise any young parents, it's worth the challenges, it's worth the effort, because having children not only ensures the future of our people, it brings so much richness, texture, and meaning to our lives. May this always be the case. Can you hear it so? May this be God's will. Let us say amen. And now let's continue in our service as we prepare for the Musaf service